So the first thing I'm looking at is I have two islands. I have an island here and an island here. What I have in here is, of course, I like to leave my points turned on. I like to see my points in my parts, mainly because I want to see where I'm connecting to, whether it's with cables or bus or even conduit and trench. We use a lot of points to identify ends. So I like to leave my points on, and I put my points on. What I also do with my points is I make sure, and if you go through any training with me, I talk a little bit about this, is I like to have my annotation size large. Here I got 2, usually it's 1.8, whatever you do. But I want it large enough so I can see those points. If they're too small and I come into something, I can't see the points at all. Let's see here. Right? If it's too small, I would not see the points sticking out in the back here. So I like my points fairly big. And that's why you see them that size. So what I want to do is talk about creating something like this cable. If you look at this cable, it loops around and comes over here. What we also do with this type of thing is if I need to show slack in a cable, I'm going to spin it around here. I love this 3D mouse. I'm going to spin it around and look at the slack in this cable. Every direction of this cable shows slack in this cable because in this case, the customer wanted slack in that cable. You can see how that cable is slack. Let's get on to part priority. You can see how that has a bend in it no matter which way I look at it. So there's a couple things we want to do there. So what I'm first going to show is what we want to do is to create this loop. We have to go by pick points. I'm going to put a cable in, and then we're going to look at the loop tool. So I'm going to add pick points, add cables. So I'm going to first look at my settings and check that I got the right cable in here. I have an 8% sag. You know, when it's this short, the sag doesn't really matter, but adding some sort of sag is worthwhile to make it look real. So I got 750 MCM. So let's take that. And I'm just going to run points, and it takes a minute to run points. When we first brought out SDS, the pick points was a maximum of 10 points. And then a couple of years ago, we've expanded it to be able to hit, I believe, infinite points. I haven't had a case where I had to pick more than an infinite. But I haven't ran out of picks yet. If you look at this tool I have here, it's just 8 points in a circle, basically. And I'll show you, I'll break down that circle in a little bit, but I just want to show you running the cable. So I'm going to pick this point to run the cable, pick the outside, and now I'm going to pick the other cable, the other point on the inside, and I'm going to come up. I'm going to come up here, and I'm making a path for this cable to be run. I got my big points that I want to select. I don't know why I didn't want to select that one. And we can run that cable. All right. So I shouldn't have picked the one down here, so I would have to rerun that cable. But in the meantime, maybe that's what we do want, but I'm not a big fan of that. I would rerun that cable. But we have that now. I'm going to save it. And the SDS, of course, SDS will pick up the length of that cable and will calculate the loop and the total length of that cable. But let's look at that cable part. So if we look in the menu or in the browser, we can find that cable. Here's our cables, and here's my loop tool. If you look at the loop tool, I put it in a pattern because I just wanted it spaced equal distant, a little bit to the inside on the outside. So let's look at the tool. So what we have is a tool like this. I'm going to take this extrusion. I'm going to make it visible. Why didn't it go visible? Let's unsuppress it, I guess. Okay, there's my extrusion. I just have this little extrusion here, and it's just a marker for me to see what I'm doing. What I've done with this tool is I've placed it on my origin planes. If you follow the substation modeling strategy, you can see that I have the tool around the origin planes. I have a spacing between those points. You can see the spacing between those points. And I placed it so that I know what height I am above the XY plane. So that when I place this tool in here, I know the height above my XY plane and as a reference. That's the way I do it. I like that idea because I'm sure of my heights are going to be equal for all of them and where I place them. So I have that tool. I'm placing these points in here. To get these points in here, what I have is two other work planes. I got a work plane here for the height, and I got a work plane here for the other. Let's change that to auto resize. I change that. And you can see how that plane is sitting there. So I got these points on that plane, and that's where I've placed those points. If I want to look at that sketch, there's my sketch. So I'm actually putting points on a sketch to create that circle. I could put more points on that circle. I can change the diameter of the circle and come up here and look at the functions. And I can look at the height is 152 above my XY plane. My diameter is 32 because that's the size I wanted. So I'm driving it from here so I know what the distance is above the XY plane. In my mind, I like that idea. I put in the cable diameter because what I'm doing actually when I'm passing through here, I'm passing the cable around itself, and I don't want it to collide at all. I want that gap in here, and I can adjust that gap with the loop tool. So if I were to adjust that gap now, adjust the diameter, I can update the cable, and it will show accordingly. This extrusion here, I just have as a surface extrusion. It's just for my reference. It just gives me an idea on where things are if I need it. But typically, I would have that visibility off. So that's the loop tool. If we come in here and we change that loop tool, let's change our diameter from 32 to 36. And maybe the cable diameter is 1.25. And that will give us a bigger space between the points. And I'll save that. Now when we come into here, I can see that my loop tool is bigger. You can see how the cable isn't passing through there anymore. And now I can update my cables. So I'm going to save this, of course, before I do anything. And I'm going to update the cable. All right, you can see it has updated the cable. I'm not using update all cables because I have a lot of cables in here and I don't want to spend the time waiting for the software to catch up to it. So you can see how that cable loop tool is done. So we've added those loops. Well, where else we may want to do that, like I said, is on these slack lines. I want to show a slack in here as well, right? So let's look at the cable loop tool or the cable slack tool in this case and on that assembly. So let's open up that assembly. Because I want it on islands, I want everything contained to the island as what we talked about in the substation modeling strategy. And let's look at that cable spacer. Is that the tool? I believe it is. All right. So this is the tool I made for here. It's just 2 points. But what I want to do is use this as a pass-through tool. And if we come into the automation requirements for a pass-through tool, right? If we come into the automation requirements for a pass-through tool, we can see what we need for a pass-through. We need work points, cables. This document, of course, is available for download once you log into our website. And you can download this document and study it. So this is the type of information we need on there. So that's what we have. We have cable 1, cable 2, cable access, and we can create this and make that usable for passing through. But what we need in this case is something to select. So I made a surface extrusion. The surface extrusion is just normal Inventor stuff. I'm just using surface instead of a solid. But I need something to pick. So that's what it is. And of course, I've done it the same way with the XY plane on the top of concrete idea. So that's what puts me in here to have this surface tool in here. You can see that is in there. Now I can place that exactly where I want it to be to create that slack. If you look at it, it's 6 by 6. Well, if you know, if I go 6 by 6 on a triangle, you know it's a 45 degrees. But it's actually slacked in both directions. So now if I place that cable in here, I can place that cable in here. I can come up to my above grade tools, pick fittings to add cable, and I can pick my fittings. And I needed that surface to make sure I picked my fittings. So it's going to go through there and it's going to put my pieces in there. Now, in this case, you can see how I have a spacer up and above. I didn't pick the right spacer, but I should have picked the same spacer as this one here for these guys. So I could delete that and rerun it. But what in this case I'm showing you is that I can run this. I have spacers on either side. I may not want a spacer here. But if I only wanted one spacer, I can actually use a spacer as a fitting. So if I did that again and I came here and I picked this fitting, picked this spacer and ran that, I can go through the spacer as well. So there's going to be at times it's going to be dependent on which way you want to do things. If I needed a spacer in the middle, I can make sure I set my settings so I don't have any spacers in there and run that again. So if I come up to my settings and make sure I don't have any spacers, I'm just going to put large numbers in here. And this is where I could have picked the proper spacer on the first one. I can run that again. We're going to pick fittings, and we're going to come through here. And now I only have the cable through that spacer. So there's different methods of doing this. And what I'm just trying to show you is different ways to run cable, different tools that we can use to do this. It's not just for loop tools or for slack. Something like this here, years ago, I worked on this model here. On this model here, and you zoom in, I needed to put a tool of points in here. So these let's get in, see how much I can zoom in on this silly thing. You can see how these cables drape down underneath the structure here. And I used the cable loop tool to put that loop in there as well. So there's different places where you want to use that cable loop tool. Now we're going to have questions at the end of this, so I'm going to keep going with this type of idea. So that's I call it a cable loop tool because that's a habit of mine, but it's a cable tool for adding slack, adding a path. Maybe it's a cable path tool. Maybe that's a better term. But let's look at our top assembly here again. And let's look at our bus. Well, where else can we do something like this? Well, here's a bus tool. I just placed a bus. What if I need to come up with some bus ends or something? I have no idea offhand, but I can do that. With the new 7.1, we have the bus tool that allows us to have different lengths on either end of the bus, but we may want further detail or further information, or we want a point that we don't want to cross our dependencies from one island to another for constraints and such as that. You never want to have constrained parts in one island or one subassembly to another subassembly. You don't want to constrain parts that way. So maybe this would help in certain situations. So I'm going to change the round bus. I think it's 4-inch. I don't know what it is offhand. Let's go what this is. I don't like the 2018 tool here. I don't know what it's telling me. It looks like 3.5 inches. So maybe I want it smaller. Let's go back to my bus. Let's see what we get with this. But now I can run my fittings to add bus. I can run this fitting to this fitting. And there's my bus. Okay? So what I'm getting now is that I'm still having my offset from those points as here, but I could pick a fitting out here. Now I could have picked this fitting and this fitting and then calculated how much offset I wanted. But either or, I'm just showing you an example with that. If I come into here, and if we look at that bus fitting tool, it's just doing the same thing as what I did with the cable fittings. I need something to select, so I have a surface to select. So I extruded a surface, just normal Inventor practice. And if you look at my origin plane, again, I have it on the XY plane. And that way it's consistent. If I'm using this again somewhere else, I have that distance above 152 inches above, so I don't have to put that number again and offset it and calculate it again. That's one way of looking at it. But you don't necessarily need it. You can have it completely floating and command it when you constrain it in your next tire assembly. And again, I'm just following the what we need. We got a bus and a bus axis in here. So that's a little bit of on a cable loop tool and bus axis tool. And I was thinking when I was doing this work that, well, where else would something like this come in handy? And I know I've done a lot of lightning stuff. So let's look at some lightning. I'm going to browse to that. I can't believe it's 24 minutes past already. Let's look at a lightning example. Included project is missing because of I used the Inventor tool. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Inventor tool. iLogic Copy Design. It's a great tool for copying it outside, copying an assembly outside of Vault. So let's come into here. I'm going to open up this lightning assembly. And the same idea of putting 4 points, because lightning works on points as well. We can select masks or points. And if you're working with some lightning and trying to come up with an idea on where to put your masts, and you don't want to build a mast and stick it and start playing with it, I'm thinking of this type of thing of doing it, is just putting 4 points on the plane, right? This plane, I put it on an angle, or did I? Oh, I put it on the angle in the assembly. So I put 4 points on this plane, and then I just pick points. I put this angle. I constrained it on a 15-degree angle. So I put that plane in here, and I ran it here. So it's just an idea. I don't know how useful it's going to be, but to me, when I'm looking at lightning, I don't know where my mast should go, and I may have to play with them. And maybe I want to put points in, play with the points, and then I have an idea of how I can develop my lightning mast locations by putting my points in, and then after that I can put my my lightning masts in and put work points on the top of my lightning mast.